Welcome to another Family History Friday video with the Butler Area Public Library. In this video, we are going to talk a little bit about World War I genealogical research. So we will talk about the kind of records that are available publicly for research, some clues that you might have in existing research that you've already done, and the next steps of how to request full service record information from the National Archives. So let's take a look. So let's talk about researching military service. You may actually have some clues in the research you've already done that will point you to individuals who served in the First World War. Two go-tos are obituaries or newspapers and select census records. So first, I often recommend that you start with obituaries and use the information in them to work your way backward in research. And here we can see an example, this obit for Fred Barkus, who died in 1955. It says that he was a veteran of the First World War. So there's an immediate indicator that I can look into more detailed service information for this individual. Newspapers more broadly, if you have access to them either online or on microfilm, can be helpful. Here are two newspaper clippings from 1919 that were published in the Connoquenessing Valley News here in Butler County. They are regarding Private Frank D. Sturgeon, who died of illness overseas during the war. His family was not notified until January of 1919 about his death. There was an article that also functioned as an obituary. And then later on that year, when the paper published a number of memorials, there was this photograph and small memorial paragraph for him. So you may want to check once you know you have an individual, or if you've got the ability to keyword search a newspaper, to check news coverage for active coverage during the war. Census records can actually help us in two instances. The U.S. Census from 1930 is the one that's going to be the most explicitly helpful. If you look all the way across the census page to the right-hand side, the last column is a question about veterans. Specifically, it asks two questions: whether you were a veteran of the U.S. military or naval forces, and there's a yes or no answer. And if it's a yes, then what war or expedition was the service in? And if you see a WW, that means that they served in the World War. Obviously, it's 1930. There was only one World War at that point chronologically in history, so hence WW for World War. The 1950 census does ask a question about military service, but it's not quite as helpful. You'll see this question at the bottom right-hand side of the page. So if an individual was male, did he ever serve in the armed forces during World War II, World War I, or any other period? The problem with the way this question's asked on 1950 is it's not a standard question asked of everyone. It's part of the sampling that was only asked of 5 people per census page at random. So it's really not an accurate representation of everybody who served in the war. However, if one of your people are in those 5 highlighted lines on the 1950 census, make sure you read to the end and check and see if there is information about military service. So more broadly, if we want to dive in and look for information about World War I service, we're going to turn online. There are a number of collections available on Ancestry or through Ancestry Library Edition. There are collections from the United States at both the federal and state level, and there are international records from a number of countries, including the United Kingdom, Canada, France, Australia, and New Zealand. If you go to the card catalog on Ancestry and look in the military category or use World War I as a keyword search, you will see a number of collections. Some of them are indexes, some of them are service records, some of them are rosters. So just take a look through and see if there's anything that is relevant to your research. Here we can see a variety of things, including state-specific militia lists, servicemen records, service cards. We have record abstracts, draft board registers, international casualty lists, military medal recipient lists, Gold Star indexes, so that's going to be related to servicemen who were killed and their families who received a Gold Star. So definitely make sure you're checking the catalog collection to see how many records there are for the First World War. We are probably familiar, if you've been watching our videos, with the fact that each collection on Ancestry has its own search page. And one collection I'm going to highlight here for World War I more broadly is this one called U.S. Headstone Applications for Military Veterans, 1925 to 1970. This collection is not specific to World War I, but it encompasses World War I servicemen, so it is a really good place to take a look for service information. Here's an example of one of those headstone applications. So these cards were filled out to put an official military headstone marker at a gravesite. You can see that they ask information about the person's service number, their enlistment and discharge dates, the branch of service, and any company or regimental information for their service, as long as personal information like birth date and death date. So with this individual, Ernest Olson, we have his service number. We know he served in the First World War because his enlistment and discharge dates fall between June 1918 to May of 1919. So make sure you're taking a look at these military headstone listings, because if a military headstone was ordered for this individual, it will have their basic service information transcribed on it. A number of states, including Pennsylvania, also have collections available to you on Ancestry, which are both veteran service records and compensation files. So in this instance, the state of Pennsylvania offered a veterans compensation payment in the 1930s to individuals who had served in the First World War. You will often find at least two documents in here. We're going to look at the file for Mendel Berman, who was a resident in Pittsburgh at the time of the war. We can see here that there is essentially a transcription of his service information. So we have his name and his address at the time of his induction into the military. We have his serial number. We have information about his transfers throughout the Army and overseas during the war. And any grades, we can see that he was made a private first class in January of 1919. The second page in here will be a more complete compensation application. We'll zoom in and look at the top half first. You can see that this is going to be more genealogical in nature for your research. It's going to confirm personal identifying information, his name, where he lived when he entered the service, where he was living in 1934 when he filled this out. So we can see that he'd actually moved from Pittsburgh to Buffalo, New York. We have his birthplace in Russia. We have the name and address for his wife and his two minor children, as well as for his parents. And then on the bottom half is where we get into the service information. So here we can see all of the organizations that he was stationed with, that he made the grade change from private to private first class, that he saw engagement at Meuse-Argonne. He did not receive any wounds, so you may see a number of people with an answer listed there. We have the dates he served overseas, and you will see that some people did serve in the military but never left the United States. They were serving domestically. And then he was honorably discharged on September 26, 1919 in Maryland at Camp Meade. And at the bottom, you will see that after filling out this application, he was eligible to 14 months of $10 payments, totaling $140. If you're wanting to then pursue more information, you're going to need to turn to the National Archives. So one place to start is their World War I topic page. The website is archives.gov/topics/WW1. There you can find some learning guides that were put together for the war's centennial with information about soldier training, life on the home front and on the battlefield, medicine during the war, etc. And then there's also a link there to help you with genealogical research. If you're wanting to request service records, you can do so through the National Archives. The website is archives.gov/veterans/military-service-records. You can see that there on the screen. And World War I records are easier to get because they're considered archival. They're more than 62 years old. 62 years have passed since the serviceman left the service. For records that are newer than that, typically they are only going to be released to the serviceman himself or next of kin. but World War I are open to a broader range of researchers. And to request it, you're going to need that service number, their branch of service, dates of service, etc., which is why it's so important to try and find some of that information on your own first. Here you can see a screenshot from their page with links to a variety of ways that you can request copies either online, through paper, or through fax request. Now, there's another huge collection related to the First World War that we haven't mentioned yet, and that is draft cards. Now, the thing with World War I draft cards is not everyone who filled out a draft card served in the war, and not everyone who served in the war filled out a draft card. So the draft card itself doesn't actually tell you anything about someone's service or if they served at all. However, they are not a collection that you want to pass up. World War I draft cards are going to be really helpful for us more generally for our genealogical research. So approximately 23% of the entire United States population filled out a draft card between 1917 and 1918. So that is going to be applicable to a really big proportion of the people in your family tree. US citizens and immigrants alike filled out the draft card. So even if they were a recent immigrant, there's a chance they filled out that card. There were 3 rounds of registration conducted, and in all, they recorded men born between 1872 and 1900. So if any men in your research were born in that date range, it is worth looking to see if they filled out a draft card. So why might we want to look at them even if it doesn't tell us if a person actually served in the war? It helps pin somebody down between census years. Because it's 1917 and 1918, it does help us catch someone in between the decennial census. We can confirm personal details like birth date, residence, marital status, immigration status. It has answers about employment, their citizenship status, and a next of kin relationship. And there's also a physical description listed on the card. We can find World War I draft cards online in a number of places, including Ancestry, Ancestry Library Edition, and Family Search. So here is the search landing page for the World War I draft card collection that you will see on Ancestry or Ancestry Library Edition. It's important to note that the draft cards all might look slightly different from one another depending on which of the 3 rounds of the draft a person completed the card in. But generally speaking, they're all going to ask about the same questions. Here's an example from the first round. This is a card filled out here in Butler for an Italian citizen named Valentin Savarini. He has a birth date listed November 22nd, 1886, that he was born in Italy. He's a laborer at the Standard Steel Car Company. He has a wife and 3 children. We have his signature at the bottom and a physical description on the back. Medium height, medium build, gray eyes, auburn hair. Here is the second draft registration. We can see it looks a little bit different, but the same general questions. We have their name, their address, their birth date and place. This individual, David John Jackson, is a native-born US citizen. He also works at the Standard Steel Car Company. His nearest relative is his father. So you can see we don't specifically ask about dependents the way the previous one does, but we do get a family member asked about. And we have the physical description questions: medium height, slender build, gray eyes, and red hair. And finally, the third round of the draft registration. This is the card that they used for that. This is the card for Eugene Ift, who lived in Slippery Rock, PA. We have, again, his birth date, his citizenship, his present occupation, that he's an agricultural student at the State College up in Slippery Rock, his signature at the bottom. His nearest relative is a Charles Ift. We'll have to do some research to figure out the exact relationship between the 2 of them, and our physical description again on the back. So I hope this has been a good overview of the types of records that are available to help you determine someone's World War I service status and to pursue further records, and wish you all the best on your research.